If you've spent your life chasing success, checking every box, and still wondering, is this all there is? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Overachiever's Oracle podcast, a sacred space where we dive into the lives of professional women who've been taught to measure their worth by how much they achieve. Here, we explore a spiritually rooted path to untangle ourselves from hustle culture and reconnect with who we truly are. I'm your host, Dr. Giovanni Washington, a former overachiever turned liberation guide, and I'm here to walk you through this journey. Welcome to the show. 40 years after they died, I found my two baby brothers, unnamed, buried in an unmarked grave. I didn't know why I needed to find them. I just knew I couldn't rest until I did. And what I found wasn't just their resting place. It was a missing piece of myself. That's how ancestral directives work. And today we're going to talk about what happens when you say yes to a call that doesn't make sense, but changes everything. The last couple of episodes, we've been walking through the framework that we use in liberation alchemy. We start off by defining what liberation means to you, not just what empire told you to chase. We then talk about the threshold that you're standing at. You've got where you are and where you're going. And then we identify the knowledge, skills, and wisdom that you need to actually cross the threshold and be successful on the other side. And once you have that tripod in order, those three legs of the chair, this is when we call in the ancestors. This is when we evoke our spiritual support. This is when we remember that you are never meant to do this alone. And not in a self-help, phone a friend kind of way. But you were never meant to do this alone because your ancestors have been waiting for you to ask. They've been waiting for you to listen, and they've been waiting for you to act. This episode is about what happens when we trust the call that doesn't make sense. When we say yes to something invisible but undeniable. It's about what happens when overachieving stops being our survival strategy and ancestral partnership becomes our liberation path. So let me tell you something that shifted everything for me. I had the immense fortune of being able to study with Elder Malidoma Somé. He's now an ancestor. And in his tradition, in the Dagara tradition where he comes from in Burkina Faso, they believe that the ancestors are not above us, they're not apart from us. These are not gods to be worshipped or feared. They are partners. They are living forces in relationship with us. And living doesn't mean that they're breathing oxygen, just to be clear. Living means that they are innervated with an energy, right? And so in this system, when they are stoking our fires, when the fires that they're stoking are tantamount to our motivation on this plane, it means that sometimes we ask them for help. And it means sometimes they give us assignments. So this invitation, this ancestral invitation, isn't just about praying, invoking, or evoking the ancestors. It is also all of those things. But it's also about listening. And this is where overachievers get tripped up. So many of us were taught to dismantle the intangible, to dismiss the spiritual, to mistrust anything we couldn't measure. So that means if it can't be explained, quantified, or scheduled, it's not valid. And listen, this is not a personal failing. This is part of the conditioning that we are here to unlearn. Because ancestral directives do not come with Google Maps. They come like a breath, like a fire in your belly, like a thread that you suddenly know you have to follow, even if no one, including yourself, understands why. And when we learn to trust this thread, that's when our real liberation begins. And just as a funny side note, my text predictor used to autocorrect GPS as GOD. And that's when I was like, this has got to be a sign. Something is happening here. So I wasn't supposed to trust the directions. I was supposed to trust God or goddess. Here we go. Okay. So before I share the story with you, I want to share with you today, I want to offer something that we believe in the Black Goddess universe. And that is simply that not all ancestors are related to us in the same way. They don't all arrive or come in the same way. Some of us are most easily connected to our bloodline ancestors, and these are the ones whose DNA we carry. We are literally connected to them through blood, whether or not we knew them in life. And then there's another set of ancestors I like to call the milk line ancestors. And these are nurturers, mentors, chosen elders who poured into us even if we weren't related by blood. And then there's the spirit or soul line ancestors. And these are ancestors of spirit, of purpose, of craft. These are elemental beings, guides, cultural ancestors that we're aligned with across space and time. So think water, earth, stone, fire. Those are definitely elemental beings. Think of a spirit of the stars, the cosmic dust. These are spirit line. I mean, the spirit line can look like whatever it looks like for you, but it's just that there is another thread of ancestors that also support us in our day-to-day lives. So I love this conception of ancestors because you don't have to know your genealogy to know your ancestors. And you don't have to have a strong relationship with your family to have a sacred relationship with your lineage. Because you have your blood lineage, your milk lineage, and your spirit lineage. So the story I'm about to tell you moves between the bloodline and the milk line. And it begins with a call that I couldn't explain. I was in my early 40s. My son was about 6 or 7. Life was full. We were dancing with Debbie Allen 10 hours a week. We were in sports and capoeira. We were just doing all the things, right? We were in kindergarten and first grade, whatever it was. I was completely wrapped up in the goings on of life with a young child. And then one day, I know people say this phrase and it sounds hyperbolic, but literally out of nowhere, just out of nowhere, I became obsessed with finding my 2 dead brothers. When I was 2 years old, my mother gave birth to triplets, and they were born entirely too early at 24 weeks. So they were 16 weeks early. And 2 of them, baby boy 1 and baby boy 3, only lived a few hours. And for most of my life growing up, we didn't really talk about them. Like, I knew my mom had triplets, but I didn't know the story. I didn't know anything about them. There were no pictures of them. And when I started to inquire what I learned from my mother, when I started to inquire when I was in my early 40s, I learned, maybe it's because I was a mother then. I think that probably had a lot to do with it. Becoming a mother myself made me have a different level of understanding about what it might have been like to lose a child. And so anyway, as I started to inquire with my mother, one, she was sort of just would look at me quizzically like, why are you asking me all these questions? But what she told me was that she didn't actually know where they were buried, and that a nurse had told her that they would be buried at the feet of an adult. And for some reason, this was very offensive to me. Like, I really took affront at this. So I already had this sort of inexplicable urge to find them, and then having this piece of information about them being buried at the feet of an adult really just cemented it for me. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to find them now. So I learned that there was no funeral, that they were not named. And my mother says that she did what she needed to do. She turned her full attention to the surviving brother, who was also born 24 weeks early and had a hole in his heart and was not expected to live. Spoiler alert, he lived till he was 36 years old. But, my mother did what she had to do, and that's her story to tell, so I won't tell that story. But I honor, whatever grief she may have held or experienced, her faith, and her choice to keep moving it. I honored it all. I honor it all. But for me, again, I had curiosities occasionally growing up, but I was then obsessed when I was in my 40s. I had to find them, and I didn't understand it. I just knew that I had to find them. So I started researching. I was able to find them in at the Office of Vital Records, and found out that they really weren't named. Baby boy 1 and baby boy 3 Washington is how they were listed. They were buried at a cemetery that was, I don't know, it's maybe 30 miles away from where we live. And I called immediately, like from the Vital Records office. It was almost 5 o'clock. Fortunately, a lady named Estrella, our star, answered the phone. And she was like, oh, from 1977, these are not in our digital records. I have to go back and actually, go through the card files. I'll call you back. So 3 days went by, no word. So I called again. And this time, a woman named Angela picked up the phone, or Angel. I asked her the same question. She said, give me a moment. I was on hold for a few minutes. She came back. I found them. And so the information that she gave me immediately was that, one, they were in fact in an unmarked grave, but they were not at the feet of adults. And that gave me immediate peace and comfort. But they, in fact, were buried in a box with each other. So they were together. And then they were in a plot with two other unnamed infants. So there was a baby under them and then a baby under that. But there was no headstone, there was no marker, and there was no names. So on their birthday, which happens to be Memorial Day weekend, I took my mother and her sister, my aunt, with me, and we visited them. And again, my mother is still like, I don't know why this is so important to you. She's like, I've made my peace with them many, decades ago. But we stood there. And at this point, my mother had actually selected names for them. And we spoke their names aloud for the first time. And that evening, we held a naming council. I eventually had their birth and death certificates amended, so their names are listed in the record. And now their certificates and their names live on my altar. And then a year or two later, we actually had a headstone placed with their names engraved on it. And the headstone actually has their names on the same line, and we left space for the other two unnamed children. So, I mean, it took, I don't know if you've heard me say, but like this work, ancestral work, takes the time it takes, right? It unfolded over time. I told the story in a couple of minutes, but it happened over like 3 or 4 years. And, in retrospect, I can see that this healing was it was certainly a healing for my family, but it wasn't just for my family. We considered it an offering for every ancestor, every African ancestor in the diaspora who died and was buried or not without ceremony. Every name that was never spoken again and every story that was lost. So this wasn't just a project, you see. It was a directive. I was being summoned to do this work. And I actually remember going to get a divination with Elder Malidoma, and I told him this story, and he looked at me and said, how did you know how to do this? And I was like, I didn't know how. I just knew that I had to do it. I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. There was nothing, I wasn't doing it for to get to a certain point. There was no predetermined outcome. I just knew that I had to find these baby brothers. So now I have many, many years, maybe 7 or 8 years later. Here's what I've understood that has happened. I believe that our bodies, our spiritual bodies, get sliced on meridian. So this is a vertical cuts on our body, and they get sliced by the violence of empires. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Colonialism destroys us. With every disconnection from our roots, we get a slice. With every story erased, something is sliced off. With every ancestor forgotten, another slice. And little by little, the integrity, the wholeness of our being is just sliced away. It falls away. And for so many of us, especially those of us who were told to be exceptional just to survive, overachievement became the way that we held ourselves together. It became our armor, our strategy for managing the ache of what was missing. It makes me so sad to say that. We overachieved to outrun the silence. We overachieve to outwork the grief. We overachieve to look whole on the outside when something sacred has gone missing within. But what if we were never meant to hold so much alone? When we begin to remember, when we answer a call like this, each act of reconnection raises one layer of the body. One vertical slice stands back up. With every layer that returns, we become more whole. We become less frantic and more rooted. We experience less loss and become more ourselves. And that's what happened for me when I found my brothers. It was a healing, yes, but also a remembering. So you might not have 2 lost baby brothers who were buried without names, but maybe there's a name you haven't spoken in years. Maybe there's a story in your family that you've heard pieces of, but no one has really ever told you the whole thing. Maybe you have ancestors that come to you in dreams. Maybe there's a deep knowing that keeps whispering, go there. We all have these threads. The invitation is simply to follow. Now, I want to be super clear. Not every ancestral call feels like fire. Sometimes it feels like a restlessness you can't explain. Sometimes they come in dreams. Sometimes it's a song or refrain that won't leave you. Sometimes it's the sudden urge to reach out to an elder. If it keeps returning to you, listen. I invite you to take a breath with me. Place your hand on your heart and ask, what call have I been avoiding? What am I hearing but pretending that I'm not? What knowing have I ignored because it didn't come with a reason? And then just breathe. Just listen. The response might be subtle. The response might be loud. Maybe it's something that makes no sense to you, but it won't leave you alone. That, my friend, might be the ancestral directive. Some connect through prayer, some through invocation, some through silent tears. It doesn't matter how you connect. It just matters that you do. If something in you is stirring, if this story reminded you that there's a voice inside you worth trusting, then Liberation Alchemy might be your next step. Liberation Alchemy is a rite of passage for those ready to leave overachievement behind and enter partnership with their deeper knowing. If you're feeling the call to explore this kind of ancestral partnership, this deeper remembering, come find me. My DMs are open at Black Goddess Within on Instagram. You can also find me on Facebook. Let's walk this path together. And remember, the ancestors are already here. They are waiting. They are whispering. They are weaving you back together. You were never meant to carry this alone.